Hey everybody, welcome. I'm the co-host of Queer Book Club, Augie Rodriguez, here at Bisexual Queer Alliance Chicago, BQAC as we're also known. And with me today, I have a special guest author, Erik Rebain. He has written Arrested Adolescence, which is about Nathan Leopold Jr. So I just want to welcome him and go ahead and take it away and introduce yourself, Erik.
Hi, thank you very much. My name's Erik Rebain. I'm an archivist, and yeah, I wrote a biography of a famous and infamous murderer.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks so much. So one question that we always ask our authors is about their coming out story. We're curious to know a little bit about your identity, how your story was, and how that's impacted your life overall.
Mhm. So I'm trans, and I started, looking into transitioning when I was in undergrad in college. And I was away at school. I had talked to a therapist out there for many months, and I finally got, prescribed testosterone. I started taking it, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to tell my family before that they start to notice, my voice changing and things like that. So I kind of forced it, kind of thing. So
And what was their reaction like?
it was difficult for a long time. It was now everyone is very supportive, very loving, but it did take maybe a year or two before it was kind of, people were kind of comfortable with that.
And did you have anybody like in your close circle of friends or families where they were like, "Oh, you're trans now. I don't want anything to do with you."
No, no, nothing like that.
Okay.
Even the people who had a negative kind of reaction, it was more, "Are you sure you're doing this for the right reasons? I love you. I don't want you to make a mistake," kind of thing. It was never like, "Ew," you know.
Awesome, awesome. So, you wrote you're by day an archivist, but
Mhm.
you wrote this book about Nathan Leopold Jr., arrested adolescence. And, it's about an infamous murder. So anybody who's into true crime is probably eating this up already. But I'm just curious to know, like, what made you interested in this character? What was the research process like? What was the writing process like for you to take on such a project?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. It's probably not how most nonfiction books get started. I just, in high school, my 12th grade English teacher showed us a documentary about him, and I was fascinated. And then I started picking up, nonfiction books about him and about the case anyway. And I read everything that I could find, and that wasn't enough. I needed to know more. So I went to the sources in the back of the book and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to start going. So I started reading the trial transcripts and the psychiatric reports. And then I was still in college. I was still in college in Michigan at this time. And I would start to take vacations to Chicago and just do research. That's all I did on my vacations. It's just look into this case, just take thousands of photos of letters and documents, and then I would go through them all when I got home. And I did that for years, just years and years and years. I had no idea that I was going to write a book. I didn't really, I had no thought about that. I just wanted to know more. But as I was going, I kept waiting for a book to come out about Leopold's later life because he donated something like 50 some boxes of letters and materials to the Chicago History Museum. His lawyer also donated about a similar sized collection. And I was like, and mostly about his later life.
Hmm.
And, after in his later prison life and when he was paroled. And I was like, when is anyone going to talk about this? Because all the nonfiction really heavily focused on the crime and the hearing, and there was maybe a chapter on prison and later life. It was so short, and I was finding out all this interesting stuff about what he was getting up to in prison and in Puerto Rico. And I said, when is somebody going to write this book? And nobody wrote the book, so I'm like, I guess I'm going to have to do it. um, and so at that point, I originally wanted to do a dual biography because really the case is Leopold and Loeb. You don't really get one without the other. But
Hmm.
Loeb died in prison, and didn't donate anything. You know, there was so little information I could find about him that it would have been so lopsided, not only because he died in 1936 and Leopold died in 1971, but there was just, I have maybe 20 letters that I've seen from him where Leopold, I mean, thousands and thousands. So it just wasn't comparable. And so I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, I had already done all this research and I'd taken all these notes, but I mean, I still do research today, even though the book's published. But I just started formatting it and just kind of, I don't know. I've never written a book before, but it was, you know, you just, what do I want to talk about? What are the important things? What has not been talked about before? And that's how I was kind of structuring things, and it just played it by ear, really. It took maybe a year or two to actually write it,
Okay.
after all the research and everything.
And how was that process for you? Like, how did you format how you were going to tell the story of both Leopold and Loeb?
Hmm. Well, originally it was going to have more Loeb, but I eventually, because it was originally also going to be much much longer, because that I overwrite everything. That's just what I like to do, and I'm so interested in this story that I could just go on about it forever. But it originally had a lot more Loeb, but when I got a publisher, they wanted it 90,000 words or something like that, and my original was, I don't know, 180,000. You know, it was way more, it was like double what they wanted.
Mm,
So I had to cut down a lot of stuff, and a lot of it was, look, this is a biography of Leopold. You're going to have to let the Loeb stuff go. So,
okay, okay. And what were just like some challenges, especially this being your first piece
mhm.
of work as an author? What were you like thinking about? I mean, you've done all the research. Like, how can you make a concise story that's digestible for readers, but still get an interest? And as you're, creating the process, all right, what's gonna work, what's not gonna work. Luckily, I have
Hmm.
a publisher overseeing this and giving me critical feedback, like, hey, the readers will like this, but they won't like this. How was that for you while you were
Well,
writing pen to paper or on your laptop or whatever?
yeah, it was it was difficult because I don't think I have a good sense for what people are interested in. I'm so in the thick of it. I'm interested in everything, and I could think something is really interesting, and other people could read it and be like, "Why are you talking about this? I don't care about this," you know?
Mm,
And it was really it was really like, what's important, and I wanted to treat every chapter like that. You know, every chapter told a story, you know, and it had a flow to it. And I thought, if I could just, if I could get every chapter to kind of flow, and then the chapters go, you know, they're all telling a story and it's all leading somewhere,
mm,
then I thought I could keep the reader's interest, even if there's some stuff where I talk too much or they get a little bit bored. If they can feel that the story is progressing, then hopefully it'll keep pushing them to keep reading. And it is really difficult, especially with his life in Puerto Rico, because I don't feel like I really, in those later chapters, in like the last, and maybe two or three chapters in the later part of the book, I did really struggle, and I don't think I ever quite got there,
mm,
because he was just living his life. You know, like in the beginning, it's like you're leading to, how did he how did he get to be the person who committed this, and that it was, how did he decide to do, you know, like how did the relationship between him and Loeb progress, and how did they decide to commit the murder, how was the murder committed, how were they caught, what was the hearing like, you know, like there was a lot of momentum there. And then with prison too, his life kept going like that, like there were stages and there was things to do. And then when he got out of prison, it's like, okay, he's readjusting, and how he's trying to get out of his parole period. And um but the later part of his life in Puerto Rico, it was just kind of like he's just living. Like I couldn't find a thread to pull those chapters together. So
mm.
it's just kind of like doing stuff, and he keeps doing things, and he's traveling and he's working and he's having relationships, and it's I yeah, so I don't know. I think I was a little too deep into it, but also maybe that's just kind of how people's lives are. You know, if there are not these enormous events happening, um, that's just kind of how people's lives are. So I don't know how to make that interesting, I don't think. But if you are interested in Leopold's life enough by that point, hopefully you will still find it somewhat interesting, even if the flow isn't quite there.
Okay. And like when it comes to, you looking through the archives and
Mhm.
researching this for it, after he's done his prison sentence for the murder of this, it was a boy, right?
A 14-year-old, yeah.
Okay. And so, he's gone through this prison sentence. Loeb is stabbed in prison.
Hmm.
So obviously their relationship is literally severed from that. But, he's doing parole in Puerto Rico. In that time, did you see like any changes like from his rehab and trying to reintegrate in society? Did you see like did he have like any remorse or any regret within his personal letters? Did did he feel bad for what he committed, around that time? Or was he just like, oh fuck it, I did what I did, was there like any change in his character post prison?
That was kind of my thesis, that no, that he didn't change all that much, really. Like, he changed in some ways. I mean, he grew up. He was in prison for 33 years. He went in when he was 19. You're gonna change from that. But as for remorse, sometimes he would say that when he was trying to get paroled. He would say that he
Mhm.
felt remorse every day. In his personal letters, I didn't see anything like that. He would sometimes make jokes about the murder. It seemed like the only thing that he regretted about that was that he got caught, and he would say, because there was a law that changed when he was originally, when he was being interrogated after his crime, the state's attorney held him and Loeb for days and days without enough evidence, without letting them talk to their lawyers and things like that. And he later in life found like that a law had passed that wouldn't have allowed him to do that. Like that was illegal. He's like, well, I shouldn't have wasted my time. Why did I waste 33 years in prison when uh, I shouldn't have had to do that. Not like, oh, I definitely should have because I killed a 14-year-old and I should have gone to prison.
Mm.
It's no, I it was against the law, so I should have been set free and it would have been fine. I just never got the impression that he actually had regret or remorse or anything like that.
And I do remember reading just from one of the excerpts online. Um, there was a line in the book where he was like, maybe I should have just been put on the death sentence instead of serving time in prison.
Yeah.
What what was like the idea behind that? Like when you were looking at the archives, what was he
Hmm.
talking about when you decided to write that paragraph about that in the introduction of the book?
Yeah, so he was a hedonist. He was an individual hedonist, which it basically is, my pleasure is worth more than anything else. Like pleasure over pain. You want to maximize pleasure, minimize pain in your life. That's like the goal.
Mm.
And he didn't know if it was worth it, because obviously prison is a horrible, horrible experience, and he didn't know if it had been worth it to go through that. Like, if because he said, if I went through 33 years of prison, I got out and I died the next day. That's obviously not worth it. I should have just killed myself before I win it.
Mm.
Um, but he came to a conclusion that there was a specific day that the amount of pleasure he received after prison made up for the hardships that he had gone through. And so that it was good that he decided to not kill himself because of that. So that's the way his mind worked.
Yeah, that's a interesting dichotomy when you look at that and his mindset then, and the fact that he's lacking remorse and what
Mhm.
he did with Loeb at the time, that this happened. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting character to like on, and like the fact that he was also gay, like,
Mhm.
that's why before we ended up recording this interview, I was asking you, was he gay? Was he queer? Was he bi? Because he also had wife,
Mhm.
and was married. And was it before or after the fact that this had happened?
Oh, he got married. Uh, what was it? 3 years after he was released from prison. So
Okay. And yeah, that's even more interesting because, I know like when we look at queer and LGBTQ history, a lot of homosexual men, they had to be married. So
mhm,
there's this like gray area where were they attracted to men and women?
mhm.
So that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, you can't know until you really dig in there, you
Yeah,
know.
so I'm glad you were able to like answer that question for me. Another question I have is do you have the book and on you and would you like to read
Yeah.
a couple paragraphs?
Sure. Yeah, I can read. Yeah, I can read a little bit of the introduction. Oh boy, I forgot. Oh, there's all this French. Okay, hopefully, sorry if anyone knows French. There's a lot of French words. Not a lot, but there's a little bit of French in here. Okay. Late on a Sunday evening in 1963, within the pale stone walls of Florence's Palazzo Pitti Art Gallery, a string quartet began to fill the air with music. Selections from Vivaldi and Beethoven surrounded a crowd, and among them a man sat and listened, his wife by his side. Their green concert tickets, stamped and torn, were tucked out of sight. After the concert, the couple made their way back to their four-star hotel, the Bercielli, just on the other side of the Arno River. The man would have been unremarkable to most. Middle-aged, with sharply receding dark hair and a paunch. He looked like any other American tourist, though if he happened to get into conversation with a local, they may have been surprised that he could speak passable Italian, albeit with a flat Midwestern accent. The man was 59-year-old Nathan Leopold Jr. He and his wife were nearing the tail end of a 4-month international vacation, and for the first time in almost 40 years, he was grateful to be alive. His had been an auspicious beginning. He had been born to a wealthy family in Chicago and was incredibly intellectually precocious, a published polyglot college graduate by the time he was 18. In the spring of 1924, Leopold seemed to have the world at his feet. He was happily anticipating a 3-month European vacation, followed by his entrance into Harvard Law School, his adulthood finally about to begin. That is, until the body of a 14-year-old boy was discovered in a culvert outside of the city. Leopold, along with his friend Richard Loeb, confessed to his murder. The European tour was hastily canceled, and Leopold instead spent his summer in the crumbling Cook County jail at the center of a maelstrom of media attention. Everyone was fascinated with the killers, who seemed to have no motive or remorse. After a month and a half, Leopold and Loeb were saved from the gallows and sentenced to life and an additional 99 years in prison. When writing to his lawyer, Clarence Darrow, after the sentencing, Leopold said that he didn't know whether to thank you or to forgive you. So that's that's the beginning of the intro, anyway.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I just
Mhm.
wanted to give the viewers slash listeners an idea of what to expect should they pick up your book.
Yeah, and that's he's talking about that moment. It then goes into that part of the little thing where he talks about deciding that his life was that it's good he didn't commit suicide right after the sentence. So
Awesome. Another question I like to ask our authors is what type of projects that you're currently working on? I know you're more of an archivist first
mhm.
as a writer, but are there some archival projects you can disclose?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, I just finished. I was a project archivist at the Chicago History Museum, and so I actually just finished, what is today, the second? 2 days ago. Um, the the History Museum got a donation of the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper photo collection, their negatives.
Mm.
And so I was part of a team who our job was to transcribe information about each of those, like they're called jobs. Like every time you send a photographer out to go take pictures of this building that collapsed. That's a job. And so we had to transcribe every single one and put it in a database so that researchers can find them. And
Yeah.
so that just ended. So that's a big thing that I just finished. But other than that, no, not really.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing a little bit about your own story and, just the interest that you had in regards to Nathan Leopold's story
Mm.
and Arrested Adolescence. And
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was important too to kind of go into his life as a gay man after. prison and in prison. I think that's an important part of the story that I wanted to tell that nobody else was telling. So
Awesome. And honestly, thanks for writing that. I'm pretty sure we have a lot of folks who are into true crime pick this up. We'll go ahead and drop some of Erik's links that you could check out, where to buy the book. And, if you want to connect with him online, we'll drop those in the description. Thanks for watching this podcast, everybody. If you haven't, drop a like on the video. It helps the channel. Make sure to comment if you read this work. Let us know your thoughts on the work. And if you haven't, definitely consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Thank you so much for being here today with us,
thank
Erik.
you for having me.